Woj at 8:30. Both are streaming live on the ESPN app. One app, one tap. Let's go. Getting you caught up on the NBA Finals storylines. The Suns jumped out to a 2-0 lead over the Bucks. Teams holding a 2-0 lead in the NBA Finals are 31-4 all time. But the Bucks, they rallied to even the series, highlighted by an iconic defensive play from Giannis blocking DeAndre Ayton's alley-oop attempt down the stretch in their Game 4 victory. And Milwaukee came back from a 16-point deficit to win Game 5. Milwaukee became the fourth team in Finals history to go down 2-0 and win the next 3 games, and the first since the 2006 Miami Heat. Stephen A., is this series more about the Suns' collapse or the Bucks' revival?
Well, for me, it's about the Suns. I'll leave the Bucks to Max. For me, it's about the Suns from the standpoint that you're up 2-0. We've been talking about CP3 and what he could bring to the table, and then we saw the 15 turnovers in a 3-game span where his health became a question mark. We saw Devin Booker wet the bed of Milwaukee in Game 3 before he came back and dropped 40-plus in Game 4, and then obviously Game 5. We saw a guy like Cameron Johnson who can hit shots, but your 2 stars are not finding him and not getting him the basketball. And we saw all of this with DeAndre Ayton, who was relatively dominant throughout the postseason. And then in this series right here, he's had great moments and not so great moments. And he's been relatively inconsistent. And when you combine that with Dario Saric going down and him having nothing other than Frank Kaminsky to back him up, he's been a bit compromised, to say the least. Those are the elements that I take into consideration, because I think if it were not for that, at the very least, Phoenix would be up right now 3-2 in this series. That's where I'm at with it.
I got to credit the Bucks. I mean, in a situation like this, it's always did one team collapse, the other team come back. So it's got to be a little of both. The other team has to give you the opportunity, but I got to say it's the Bucks, Stephen A. And by the way, a point that you made earlier plays into this. It's not just that the Bucks have been making plays to win games. They've been sealing the games with those plays. It's not like they needed those plays in order in that moment to score the point they needed, the points they needed to take the lead. By and large, it preserved leads that they'd worked to earn, but then they have iced the game with some of the most iconic plays now in the history of basketball, right? These are some of the most memorable plays of all time in the finals. The block by Giannis, again, think about the players involved. Stephen A., this is a point you sometimes make. We'll talk about posterizing dunks and which one is best, and you will frequently point out, look who it was on. Well, look who it was on to seal the deal right there, right? It's on Devin Booker, who was white hot, stops the penetration from Booker, and then recovers and goes from, the top of the key all the way back to, and Ayton was skying for the dunk, for the alley-oop, and blocks it, right? Like that, think of the 2 players he just did that on. Never mind the amount of skill, difficulty, athletic ability, size, everything, awareness that it took in that moment. And then in the very next game, the steal by Drew Holiday and the alley-oop to Giannis, like they have been doing things. And even as you pointed out earlier, Chris Paul, tremendous blunder, because it would have been a 1-possession game. They had 15 seconds. Who knows? But it's not like he did that and coughed up the lead doing it. The Bucks were up in the game. And even the alley-oop, where some people say, they needed to slow it down and go. No, fortune favors the bold, right? You go for it. You think you could score, you go for it. And they did. And it was with the foul. Like the Bucks have been playing fearless, not scared to lose, playing to win kind of basketball. And I have to credit them for these comebacks.
Well, I'm not trying to take any credit away from them. What I'm trying to say, Max, is that they're not doing anything that we didn't expect them to do if Giannis were healthy. The reason why we had so many question marks about Milwaukee coming into this series was because Giannis's injury was so nasty looking. You got to remember, we walked into the NBA Finals wondering whether or not Giannis would be available for Game 3. Remember that, Max. I'm in Phoenix for Game 1 doing SportsCenter with Stephen A. and Mike Wilbon and I on the set, and it was at that moment that we found out that Giannis was cleared to play Game 1. We were actually stunned.
Right.
We didn't think he would be available before Game 3, if that.
Isn't that to his credit? That's to the Bucks' credit. That
No. Well, I'm not taking any credit away. I'm just simply saying that we were speculating that he would not be available. So the real question about the series was, okay, now we're going to see what Middleton and Holiday are capable of without Giannis to lean on the basketball court with them. That's what we were looking at. That's how we were viewing the series. When I look at Phoenix and I look at them being undermanned, smaller, obviously devoid of the level of athleticism that Milwaukee has at its disposal, along with those big bodies, it's like, you climbing an uphill battle. And still, there were opportunities for them to win games 4 and 5. And if they had won games 4 and 5, this series would actually be over
I disagree.
in 5 games if it weren't for 2 or 3 plays.
I disagree with the basic, and Richard Jefferson brought this up earlier, this idea that Milwaukee's more talented. I think Phoenix is more talented. You pointed out Milwaukee's bigger. Milwaukee's a better combination
I said more athletic.
of size.
I said more athletic.
Yeah, more athletic, especially
Right.
at the
That's what I
size.
said.
But I think the Phoenix Suns are the more talented team, even without Saric. I think when the Phoenix Suns are playing well, the points come easy. Everyone touches the ball. They shoot it very well. Like, they do a lot of really good things. The Bucks, don't forget what you're talking about with Giannis, not only playing through injury, basically hyperextended knee. It looked like he could be out for the rest of the playoffs. Then he comes back and he's there for Game 1. That's to his credit. That has to do with toughness and wanting it and all that stuff, and a little luck, sure. But the whole thing about you be impressed anyway, Richard, the question is, if he loses the series, one word to describe him. Stephen A., you came closer. The word is tragic. Tragic. Because that incorporates sadness. And this is what tragic really means. A tragedy is a story in which a hero, a heroic figure, I think Chris Paul's a heroic figure. I agree with you, Richard, about that. But is destined for sadness based on some fatal flaw. Stephen A., you've pointed out many times how small players are at a disadvantage. There has almost never been a guy, as I mentioned, under 6'4", who has won a championship as the best player on a team. Even Steph Curry in 2015, it took injuries on the other side for that to happen. It barely ever happens. And Chris Paul's, 6 feet tall? In the NBA, in a sport that selects out for size, really hard to lead a team as that team's best player, or along with Booker, one of the 2 best players, to a championship. And so that may be the fatal flaw that leads to sadness for the hero here. That he's destined for it, maybe. And Stephen A., you brought out how that boneheaded play, because that really was a huge blunder. 1 possession game turns into a 2 possession game with 15 seconds left because he shoves the other team's superstar while he's in the air, which is a dangerous play, and has no chance to ensure that he doesn't make the basket and puts him on the line down 3 points, which was inevitable. They were going to be down 3 points. Maybe that frustration comes from the fact that it's a miracle even that he's one of the 10 to 15 best players in the world year in and year out at 6 feet tall in a land of giants. But if he loses this series as a result, especially after what happened in Game 5, the word that comes to mind for me would be tragic.
See, look, Max, the reason why I'm not going with this sad, crazy narrative is I truly believe the Phoenix Suns were only favored in this series because there were questions at the start of the series is because there was questions about Giannis. There were questions about Giannis, his health, would he play, would he not, and I think that's why when they talk about favorite, but I think the Milwaukee Bucks are the more talented team here, right? Like, let's make no mistake. So really and truly, are they ultimately favored in this series, even with the 2 being down 2-0, the Milwaukee Bucks were to start? The reason why I am saying impressed is because no one thought that the Phoenix Suns would be here. No one thought that the Phoenix Suns would accomplish what they accomplished all season long, let alone getting to the postseason, and he was dominant in helping his team get there. No one thought that Oklahoma City would even accomplish anything. What do I think about Chris Paul if he's not able to pull this off? I'm not going with this woe is me tragedy. I'm going to say, look, if I look at Chris Paul right now, I was impressed. You don't have to win a championship to be impressive, to gain people's respect. But what he has done in and year out, especially in these last few years at the latter part of his career, I look at Chris Paul and I'm impressed. Is that a point guard that I would want on my team? When you're talking about all the great point guards, not just overall. When you're like Jason Kidd, Magic Johnson, great level point guards, and you're like, look, Chris Paul's impressive. At the end of the day, whether his body holds up, he's had some bad luck, but I'm impressed with the way he handles himself year in and year out.
Well, that's us. But RJ, most of the public is not going to view it that way. You're absolutely right in terms of how you look at it, how I look at it. But when we ask a question like this, we're really talking about what because again, the average viewer doesn't get to just come on national TV and speak and articulate and elocute their thought process. We have to do that for them. And so when we're speaking about what the vast majority of the public is going to look at when they look at CP3. We recognize the fact that the only reason they were considered favorites was because of the questionable health of Giannis Antetokounmpo after he had twisted his leg or his knee, messed his knee up, hyperextended his left knee so badly, his right knee, I believe, against Atlanta in the conference finals. We recognize that. But nevertheless, we've seen Phoenix have opportunities in this series. And even though we've seen CP3 put up numbers, I mean, when you're averaging 21 and nearly 9 assists a game on 54% shooting and 52% from three-point range, that's impressive. But obviously more is needed.